Tonight, a territory reunited. Interstate travellers return as NT borders reopen and harsher fines announced for rule breakers.
I reinforce the fine has now been increased to $5,056. That should signal to everyone the seriousness of which we're treating it.
Also tonight, coronavirus chaos. Victoria records its worst day in the pandemic so far, with more than 400 new cases. Pleading not guilty, Children's Commissioner Colleen Gwynn to defend the charge of abusing office. And remembering Jack, a state funeral announced for a trailblazing Territory legend. Good evening, Amy Culpitt with ABC News. The Territory's borders have officially reopened, welcoming back hundreds of Australians into the NT from the road and air. Many were reunited with families after months apart, while others arrived to escape winter for a holiday. But not everyone was free to enter the community. Busloads of Victorians were taken to Howard Springs to spend the next 2 weeks in supervised lockdown.
A loving embrace for a family reunited. This man's flight from Perth was the first from an interstate capital to touch down in Darwin since NT borders reopened at midnight.
I've been away working, so I wasn't able to come back without doing the quarantine, so as soon as it opened up, I jumped back on the plane and come home.
It's the first day in 4 months people have been able to enter the Territory and enjoy the lifestyle without having to quarantine.
Do a bit of barra fishing, middle markets, enjoy the sunsets, have fun.
While most travellers were free to go, those from coronavirus hotspots weren't as lucky. These people from Melbourne were escorted by police to charter buses destined for quarantine.
We are focusing on getting people safely from the airport to Howard Springs and into rooms without any transmission of the virus. That's our prime objective now, is community safety and keeping the NT safe.
This is the sort of accommodation that people arriving from hotspot destinations will have to stay in for at least 14 days. It'll be one person per room with a single bed each, but families will be able to stay in blocks and people will be allowed to go out onto their balconies to get some fresh air, but they won't be able to go any further and won't be able to use any of the shared recreational facilities.
The government has also increased fines for breaching directions from the Chief Health Officer from $1,100 to more than $5,000. The first fine had already been issued before the announcement was even made.
That was a 25-year-old that travelled from Queensland on the 15th of July. He chose a commercial premises to undertake his quarantine. We attended there, he wasn't in his room. When we engaged with him, he advised that he was tired of the four walls already.
Although borders have reopened, authorities are urging people not to forget the pandemic is far from over.
Today, like every other day, I'm stressed because coronavirus is serious and complacency plus coronavirus is the killer. We cannot relax.
We have seen this upsurge in numbers and how quickly it can be transmitted from a single case. So who's going to take the accountability for the first death in the Territory is what I'd say.
A sombre reminder, this pandemic is everyone's responsibility. Cameron Gooley, ABC News.
Since the borders reopened at midnight, more than 1,000 travellers have crossed into the NT by road. Caravan parks say they're already starting to see more business, and grey nomads say they're happy to start spending.
At times there was one, and then there were many. Police say more than 100 vehicles were camped near the NT South Australia border overnight, ready for when the quarantine restrictions. Nhulunbuy residents Heather and Bill Lucas have been driving around the country for the last 2 years and crossed back into the NT this morning.
We did stay for about 6 months, or 4 months in South Australia, which we didn't intend to do. We intended to go through Western Australia, but now we're going to go that way.
They say it was quiet when they crossed the border around 6 o'clock this morning, but the rest stop they spent the night at certainly wasn't.
About 20 vans at the rest stop we were at and about 20 across the other side.
But for travellers not in caravans, they've had to find other ways to keep themselves occupied.
I left Canberra on the 10th of June. Just got stuck at the border, so I worked a month on a cattle farm.
People in quarantine can also freely travel the Territory from today, as long as they haven't recently travelled through a coronavirus hotspot. Graham and Lynn completed their quarantine earlier this week and say they're looking forward to exploring more of the NT.
Mainly the East McDonald Ranges, which we hadn't toured previously to that. So we've enjoyed going out and having a look at that, spending a bit of money in the town, as you do.
Accommodation providers are also welcoming the extra customers.
I think we had 7 for today and a couple more for tomorrow. And so that sort of builds up a little bit.
The decision to open the NT's borders is a cause for concern for many in the community. And while Lynn says she understands their concern, she says it's been detrimental for businesses.
If we can do it safely, then it's necessary for things to get back to whatever the new normal is and still stop the spread.
Anyone arriving from hotspots will be directed to hotels in Alice Springs for their mandatory quarantine, while a new drive-through COVID-19 testing clinic will also be set up next week. Mitchell Abram, ABC News, Alice Springs.
And there'll be more coverage of the NT borders reopening later in the bulletin. Victoria has recorded yet another disturbing daily rise in coronavirus cases, with 428 new infections overnight. It marks the state's worst day in the pandemic so far, and the death toll has also risen. 3 people in their 70s and 80s have died.
Heavy-duty help is flying to Melbourne, this time 200 soldiers from Brisbane's 7th Brigade. But after 3 more deaths and 428 new cases, regional Victorians, like their metropolitan counterparts, are being urged to arm themselves with masks even before this group arrives.
If you are out and about in regional Victoria and you don't think you can maintain that social distance, then we are requesting of you that you wear a mask.
We are in the fight for our lives.
The Stage 3 restrictions imposed just over a week ago have kept most new COVID-19 cases inside the metro region, but there are cases springing up in country Victoria.
We've had about 42 cases since the 1st of July.
60 of the state's 160 testing sites are in country areas. More are on the way for the Greater Mildura, Bendigo and Shepparton areas.
It's hard to stop. It's just that it's out of control at the moment.
Inside the lockdown areas, Melbourne's northwest continues to be the main concern, where clusters at aged care homes, businesses and schools keep expanding.
We have not turned the corner here. Worse than that, 428 cases does not just represent that we've got increasing numbers day on day. There will be dozens of individuals who will require hospitalisation.
There are 250 cases linked to the Flemington and North Melbourne public housing towers. That lockdown is now subject to an investigation by the Victorian Ombudsman. African community leaders say authorities are mishandling the cluster with poor communication.
With all respect to the police, they're putting law and order in place. What do we need? To crack a nut with a sledgehammer?
The government's resisting calls by the AMA for immediate Stage 4 restrictions.
What does Stage 4 look like so that we can get ourselves prepared for it?
Police are cracking down on people straying too far from their local area.
If you're in 2 minds about whether you should do something, chances are you shouldn't.
Tracking data shows how Melburnians cut their movement during the first lockdown, and 1 week into the second lockdown, activity is dipping again. Authorities hope COVID-19 cases will follow suit.
Certainly, we have an expectation that the things that we've put in place 2 weeks earlier should show up in the numbers. So at the end of this week, we're getting very close to that.
But health authorities say they won't wait till that period is over to make a decision if numbers keep rising. They say all kinds of options, restrictions and lockdowns remain on the table, meaning this weekend's figures are extremely important. Iskandar Razak, ABC News, Melbourne.
No more mingling, that's the message from the New South Wales Premier as restrictions are tightened for indoor venues in the state. And the public's being warned to follow the rules, otherwise harsher measures will be inevitable. Antoinette Collins reports.
From today, group bookings at pubs will be limited to 10 people, with a maximum of 300 people per venue. Everyone will have to sign in and stay seated with hygiene marshals monitoring proceedings. And it's now mandatory for venues to have a COVID-safe plan registered with authorities.
I think it's a responsible thing to do.
Especially after a few schooners, you get a bit touchy-feely and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's probably a good idea to start dialing it back a bit.
Those same restrictions will also be enforced on clubs, restaurants and cafes from next Friday.
The fact that those restrictions will come into place in those areas of southwest Sydney next weekend is not an excuse to have a huge party this weekend.
Funerals and places of worship will have numbers capped at 100, while weddings and corporate events will be limited to 150.
Completely seated, no dancing, no singing, no mingling.
150 maximum. And please know that whether it's a cafe, a restaurant, a club, a pub or a wedding, everybody indoors is subjected to the 4 square metre rule.
We have taken a pragmatic approach but a fair approach to businesses, understanding that everyone's under enormous pressure, but I think it is time that we start to issue tickets over using discretion.
The tighter restrictions come as another 13 cases of COVID-19 are confirmed in New South Wales. The number linked to the Crossroads hotel cluster now stands at 42. The Stockland Mall at Wetherill Park is now in the spotlight after 5 confirmed cases spent time there while infectious. 3 cases have been linked to a Thai restaurant.
We're urging anyone who was at the mall in the last 2 weeks to be particularly vigilant for symptoms, and especially those who attended the Thai Rock restaurant on the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th or 14th of July.
Spectators will also be limited at kids' community sport. From today, only a parent or guardian will be allowed to watch. Antoinette Collins, ABC News.
The Northern Territory Children's Commissioner Colleen Gwynn has taken leave from her role and released a statement this afternoon after she was charged with abuse of office yesterday. Now, Ms Gwynn says she will vigorously defend the charge. With more, I'm joined by Melissa McCamel. What has Colleen Gwynn had to say?
Well, Colleen Gwynn released a statement through her lawyers this afternoon and says she intends to plead not guilty to the charge. I'll read her statement now. She says, "I will vigorously defend this charge and my reputation. This is a misconceived charge." She says, "Throughout my long career, I have only ever acted in the interests of the Northern Territory. In my role as NT Children's Commissioner, I've always been motivated to act in the public interest and in the interests of NT children." She says she was not offered an interview by police, and she says she's still not aware of the specifics of the charge against her. She says, "Like every citizen, I am entitled to the presumption of innocence and I look forward to clearing my name." Now, we understand Ms Gwynn has today taken leave from her role as the Children's Commissioner and an acting Commissioner is yet to be appointed.
And Mel, what do we know about these allegations?
Well, the allegations themselves and the specifics of the allegations are unclear at the moment. What we do know is that a referral was made to police in 2018 by what was then the Public Interest Disclosure Commission, which has since been replaced by the ICAC. We understand that referral was made in 2018 to the Special References Unit, which is a section of the NT Police Force which was created to investigate these types of referrals. The charge carries a maximum penalty of 3 years in prison. Ms Gwynn is expected to face court in Darwin Local Court on the 27th of August.
Okay, Mel, thank you. The United States has reported 77,000 new infections in one day, the highest recorded globally since the pandemic began. It's the 11th time the US has broken its own record in a month, with cases on the rise in 41 states. In Texas, Army medical teams have been called in to ease the pressure on health facilities.
They're bringing a few physicians, they're bringing a lot of nurses, they're bringing medics. Manpower, what we need to provide better service to our patients.
The country now has more than 3.5 million confirmed cases and more than 138,000 deaths. Brazil has now topped 2 million coronavirus cases, with infections doubling in just under a month. The country is the second worst affected nation after the United States, with more than 76,000 deaths. President Jair Bolsonaro contracted the disease last week and has come under heavy criticism for his management of the pandemic. Russian spies are being accused of hacking organisations that are developing coronavirus vaccines in Britain, America and Canada. The 3 nations have condemned efforts by Moscow to steal the research. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports from London.
These are the propaganda images released from Moscow. In them, scientists claim to be leading the world in developing a vaccine. Now the West is calling the Kremlin out.
It's clearly wrong, contrary to international law, contrary to Russia's responsibilities as a member of the international community.
The UK, the US and Canada know their vaccine research is being hacked, and they're warning the world it's being ordered by the Kremlin.
We worked very closely with our allies to ensure that we would take measures to keep that information safe, and we continue to do so.
The three nations are pointing the finger at Russia's top spies and a group known as Cozy Bear that was also linked to email leaks during the 2016 US election.
If you want to be first to the market with your product, then one of the ways of getting there is to steal the research of somebody who else otherwise might get there ahead of you.
The nations claim hackers exploited software flaws to access vulnerable computer systems, used malware to steal files from infected machines, and tricked individuals into handing over login details, known as spear phishing attacks. No research has been compromised yet, but there's an increasing willingness to make public what intelligence agencies know.
Given that the world is trying to come together to find a vaccine, I'm afraid it's a pretty egregious behaviour, and it deserves and it should be called out.
It's not only vital vaccine work that the Kremlin is accused of meddling with. The British government says it also has evidence that Russian actors tried to influence last year's general election.
They're accused of disseminating leaked documents about a free trade agreement with America, used to the Labor opposition's advantage, but not ultimate success. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
Staff at some of Australia's richest universities say they are fearing for their jobs, and unions claim tens of thousands have already been quietly let go during the COVID crisis. In contrast, Australia's Vice-Chancellors lead the world in salaries and stand accused of rank hypocrisy in obscuring their staff's employment status. Here's National Education reporter Connor Duffy.
Hi Leon, how are you going?
I'm pretty good, thanks.
Dash Jayasuriya has spent her entire adult life working on campus, but has now become a victim of the university sector's alleged dirty secret, casualisation. As international student numbers fell, she was swiftly let go after 6.5 years teaching English at Deakin University.
This has left a really sour taste in my mouth, as I think it has for many of my colleagues. The way that they so quickly kind of jettisoned us.
Victoria is the only state which now requires universities to include casualisation and contract figures in their annual reports. The latest figures show a record high of 68% of workers across the sector in insecure work, and industry insiders say it's a similar picture nationwide. The worst offender, Australia's richest school, the University of Melbourne. It employs more than 72% of staff on insecure terms, despite having more than $4 billion in reserves, and female staff are disproportionately affected.
Less superannuation, less of that security, and that means many people who work in academia across our universities may end up retiring in poverty.
Unions allege the university's reluctance to release this data is obscuring the scale of COVID job losses. Rather than the roughly 1,500 redundancies announced nationally, it claims 2 Melbourne universities alone have dismissed 5,000 casual staff. The Universities Employers Association defended its decision not to include casual staff data in annual reports in other states. Universities are required to give the information to the federal government, but there's a 12-month delay before it's publicly available. Sector analysts blame casualisation on the drying up of government revenue.
I guess universities have been a bit conservative because those markets can be a bit fickle.
Back in Melbourne, Dash says it's the ivory towers that are truly fickle. Connor Duffy, ABC News.
Pregnancy warnings on alcoholic drinks will be mandatory in Australia after the Ministerial Forum on Food Regulation accepted new standards. New warning labels will need to be printed in red, black and white and will sit underneath a heading reading pregnancy warning. The alcohol industry supported making the labels mandatory but warned mandating the use of colours would be costly. Clinicians and health advocates say the changes will help reduce fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
So we're really pleased that today ministers have decided to support this label, and that it's a label that is visible and a label that will clearly communicate the risks of harms of consuming alcohol when pregnant. Alcohol companies now have 3 years to make the changes to their labels.
A state funeral will be held for the trailblazing former member for Arnhem, John Culpitt, next week at Marara Stadium. Mr Culpitt, often known as Jack, passed away last week, aged 69. He was the member for Arnhem for a decade and the Territory's first Aboriginal Cabinet Minister. His family, including current member for Kurrama, Nari Culpitt, have remembered him as a leader and advocate for Aboriginal people, their countries and their rights. Mr Culpitt's life will be publicly celebrated at Marara Stadium next Wednesday, July 22nd at 3 p.m. It's the moment many have been waiting for, the reopening of the NT's borders to most Australians, and with it, long-awaited family reunions, new careers, and for one loved-up couple kept apart for months, it's meant there's even a wedding on the horizon.
At 3 months old, baby Oliver is yet to meet any of his grandparents.
We've got family all around the world who are close and none of them have been able to meet him, and we don't know when most of them will be able to.
While today's changes to border rules mean some Australians can travel freely to the Territory, only one grandparent is likely to make it here, given the current restrictions to travel from Victoria.
My mother hopefully will come up and meet my first child.
Oliver's parents, Amanda and Peter, say it's been hard having a first child without family around, but they're grateful to live in the safest part of Australia.
I'm frustrated, but the frustration is in the situation, not in the way it's been handled. And I think that we've been so lucky up here.
For others, like 26-year-old Cassandra, relief is on the horizon. Her partner, a FIFO worker in Western Australia, left Darwin for work in March, only to be shut out indefinitely.
It's like the butterflies again because I haven't seen him for so long.
Not only will they be together again, they'll have a courthouse wedding in August, brought forward because of coronavirus.
We'll get married and then we'll road trip it down to Perth and start our life down there.
Meanwhile, Melbourne teacher Sarah had planned to come to Darwin in March but was stopped in her tracks by the pandemic.
Quit my job, moved out of my house, put all my stuff into storage. Let's have a look.
But in just the past few days, she's secured a teaching job in the NT, so she's packed up, flown north and is now starting her 2 weeks of supervised quarantine in Howard Springs.
Fun! I just can't wait for some warm weather. It's freezing in Melbourne at the moment.
A moment worth waiting for. Kate Ashton, ABC News.
To finance now, the share market staged a late rally to finish higher, but investors remain concerned about the spread of COVID. Here's Philip Lasker.
Oh, what a difference a pandemic makes. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg was planning to deliver a surplus. Now he's desperately trying to keep the show on the road. Next week, we get an update. CBA thinks the deficit will be $85 billion, 4.3% of GDP. Then it blows out in this financial year to $190 billion, or 10% of GDP. Westpac is expecting the income support measures to be wound back considerably after September, from $95 billion to around $16 billion, as they become more targeted to specific industries and JobSeeker is scaled back. What's going on in Victoria and New South Wales tells you that all these forecasts are on very shaky ground. COVID-19 concerns are driving sentiment on global markets at the moment. Local investors are waiting to see whether New South Wales suffers the same fate as Victoria. Most sectors were weaker. Steelmaker BlueScope flagged an earnings hit from coronavirus. Kogan was found to have misled consumers on a sales promotion. With the mood more cautious, gold found support, climbing back towards the $1,800 mark. The Australian dollar is generally firmer, trading well above 69.5 US cents. Also holding the economy back will be this. There are so many people looking for more work, as shown by the underutilisation rate, which combines unemployment and underemployment. Too many people, not enough work. Wages growth tracks the underutilisation rate. Welcome to a world without pay increases, and that's finance.
Representative football is set to make a return to the Northern Territory after a 15-year hiatus. The best players from the NTFL will be selected to pull on the Ochre Guernsey in an exhibition match to be played on the Australia Day long weekend next year. The last NT representative game was against North Adelaide in 2006, when the local side lost to the SANFL team at Marara Stadium. And for the first time, the women's competition will also field a representative team. Who the Territory teams will line up against will be announced in the coming months. Collingwood forward Jordan De Goey could spend months on the sidelines after injuring a finger in last night's win over Geelong at Perth Stadium. De Goey will undergo surgery this weekend on his right middle finger after he tore a flexor tendon. The 24-year-old kicked 5 goals as the Magpies won by 22 points to move into second spot on the ladder. A man who ran onto the field during the match faces a $50,000 fine and may be forced to isolate for 2 weeks. The Raiders have shrugged off injury woes, stunning the Roosters 24 points to 20 in a seesawing encounter at the SCG last night. The win was sweet revenge over the side that beat them in last year's grand final and reaffirms Canberra's premiership credentials.
Having fought back to level the scores at 12-all just after half-time, it was the stray Angus Crichton elbow on Raiders prop Josh Papali's nose that really turned the match.
Get up and have a go at one another. There it is.
The Raiders were stunned to see the penalty go against them. But after taking and then losing the lead again, the Queensland State of Origin star found himself having the last laugh.
Papali through a huge hole. He'll score untouched.
I don't understand why we didn't get the penalty. But when he got whacked in the nose like that, I was pretty confident that we were going to go on and win this match because they poked the bear.
It's footy. If you're in a tackle, you're going to get some bits here or there.
Robinson admits his side finished well short of the mark. After conceding the first try of the match, the Roosters hit back with a Brett Morris double by the half hour and were looking like the competition favourites they remain.
Long ball for Morris, who's in for number 2.
It was a piece of Chance Nickel-Clockstad brilliance just after the break that allowed skipper Jared Croker to draw the Raiders level.
For Nickel-Clockstad, who kicks in behind them. Croker is there.
Williams was back to his running best.
Williams takes them on. He will score.
And Papali's best game since the season restarted gave Canberra more than just a sniff. Stewart was full of praise for his side's fight back, but it's clear he won't be letting the Raiders get too far ahead of themselves.
Oh, proud. I mean, I'm very proud of the players, and it's just another win, though. We've got to just keep that heart and style of play. Just move into the next match now.
A grand final replay that lived up to all the hype, but at a cost, with more injury woes for both sides. The Raiders lost centre Michael Oldfield to a hamstring injury, while Crichton also limped off with a knee injury 20 minutes from time. And there may be more pain on the horizon for the Raiders, with homegrown Origin winger Nick Chotrich set to take up a multi-million-dollar deal with the Bulldogs. Brett McKay, ABC News.
Now to the weather, and tonight's viewer photo was sent in by Priscilla Rowlands. A sunny day across the Territory with barely a cloud to be seen. In the top end, it was dry after a sub-20 degree night in Darwin, 32 the top in the city today. It got up to 34 in Berry Springs. Around the Territory, the temperature dipped below zero in Alice Springs overnight, 21 the top there today. Tennant Creek was 26 and Katherine 32. Around the country, Sydney and Perth had tops of 15, Adelaide reached 20 degrees and it was 23 in Brisbane. Clouds spiralling around a deep low pressure system in the Tasman Sea extends across New South Wales, and a ridge of high pressure over central and northern Australia is from a high southeast of Tasmania and will continue to weaken as a cold front moves across the Bight. Interstate tomorrow, Perth and Adelaide 17, sunny in Brisbane 23, while Canberra and Melbourne are both expected to reach 13 degrees. To our north, storms in Singapore 32, sunny in Dili 30, with Denpasar getting up to 31 degrees. Around the Territory, Alice Springs to range between 4 and 25, Tennant Creek 27. Further north, Katherine and Bullman both with tops of 34, 26 the top tomorrow in Numbulwar. Down to 19 tonight in Darwin, 31 the top in the daytime. Berry Springs and Bachelor both with tops of 34 degrees. The morning low tide will be at 10:42 with the high just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Sunrise will be at 8 minutes past 7 and set at 6:38. And looking ahead for Darwin, the humidity will increase over the weekend with the cool nights hanging around all week. And in Alice Springs, becoming warmer as a trough approaches from the west. A patchy cloud band with rain will move over the region from Sunday, clearing during Tuesday. And to stay up to date with the latest news from the Northern Territory, head to our website news.abc.net.au. And that's ABC News for this Friday night. Enjoy your weekend. Good night.
Next on ABC and iView, see how the French use public gardens as an expression of money, power and passion.